Good morning, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Sutta Study. So hello to some friends joining in. Hello, Gita, Gabriella, James, Mark, Grant, Jens, Bradley, Michael, and Sarah. Welcome. So this morning we'll be going through the Aṭṭhaka Sutta, so Majjhima Nikaya number 52. So as usual, I'll read through the sutta, and then at the end you can ask questions, and I'll answer them as best I can. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. So again, today we're looking at Majjhima Nikaya number 52, the Aṭṭhaka Sutta, which is translated here as the Discourse to the Man from Aṭṭhaka City. So Aṭṭhaka City just means connected with 8. So 8 what is not clear. And I don't believe that Aṭṭhaka Nagara comes up in any other significant sutta. So it's I don't really have any clue why the city has that name. Anyway, so as usual, I'll read through and give some explanations from time to time, and then we'll have some discussion at the end. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, Venerable Ānanda was living at Vesali in Belova village. On this occasion, Dasama, a householder from Aṭṭhaka city, had arrived at Pataliputta because of some business. Then Dasama went to the chicken park and approached a certain monk, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When he was seated to one side, Dasama said to that monk, "Bhante, where does Venerable Ānanda now live? We wish to see Venerable Ānanda." And the monk replies, "Householder, Venerable Ānanda lives at Vesali in Belova village." Then after Dasama had finished his business in Pataliputta, he went to Belova village in Vesali, approached Venerable Ānanda, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When he was seated to one side, Dasama said to Venerable Ānanda, "Bhante Ānanda, is there any one thing that was said by the Blessed One, the knower, the seer, the arhat, the fully self-awakened one, by means of which a vigilant, ardent, dedicated monk might liberate an unliberated mind, eliminate all the corruptions that have not yet been eliminated, and reach the unsurpassable freedom from bondage that has not yet been reached?" In other words, so the layman Dasama asked Ānanda if there was anything the Buddha said, any one practice one can do, which will lead to liberation, which will eliminate all one's defilements and bring about full enlightenment. So he's asking for a single practice, a single complete practice which will lead to enlightenment. And Ānanda confirms. He says, "Householder, there is indeed one thing that was said by the Blessed One, the knower, the seer, the arhat, the fully self-awakened one, by means of which a vigilant, ardent, dedicated monk might liberate an unliberated mind, eliminate all the corruptions that have not yet been eliminated, and reach the unsurpassable freedom from bondage that has not yet been reached." And Dasama asks, "Bhante Ānanda, what was the one thing?" Etc. And Ānanda replies, "Householder, secluded from sensuality and from unwholesome phenomena, a monk attains and remains in the first jhana, which has thought, examination, and the rapture and happiness born from seclusion." So reaching the first stage of samadhi, the first stage of deep, stable samadhi. So I've spoken at some length about jhana on other occasions, so I'm not going to go into detail on this occasion. So the monk enters jhana, first jhana, and he reflects. This is the first jhana. It is conditional and volitional. So abhisankata means conditional. Abhisankata, conditional is one translation, but there's a number of other ways of translating this. So abhisankata literally means constructed or formed. So something which is made up of sankharas, something which is a dependent phenomenon in that it depends upon other things to happen. A conditional phenomenon. It depends upon other conditions in order for it to happen. So in other words, it's not something which is stable. It's not something which is reliable or dependable. It's something which only happens under certain limited circumstances, under certain limited conditions. And volitional means that it is produced by intentions, by an act of willpower. So again, it's something which one needs to make a conscious effort to attain, a conscious effort to experience. It doesn't just happen automatically. And it's also not something which is always going to be present or which is always going to happen. So then the monk reflects, whatever is conditional and volitional is impermanent and will cease. So it's anicca, which means it's impermanent, it's uncertain, it's unfixed, it's unstable, it's insubstantial, and it's nirodha dhamma. So nirodha dhamma means it has the nature of cessation. It has the characteristic of cessation. So it's translated here in the future tense, it will cease. But nirodha dhamma, again, it means it has the characteristic of cessation. So this is a slightly deeper statement. So nirodha dhamma, having the characteristic or the nature of ceasing, of cessation, doesn't just mean that something will cease. It means that even while it is present, it already has the aspect of cessation. So this also is pointing to the empty or insubstantial nature of the phenomenon. It's indicating that even while the phenomenon is present, it is also manifesting the aspect of cessation. It already has the characteristic of non-existence. So even while it exists, it already has the character of non-existence. So then it says, the monk, being stable in that perception, he reaches the elimination of the corruptions. In other words, through attaining the first jhana and then reflecting that the first jhana is conditional and volitional, impermanent and subject to cessation, has the nature of cessation, then through that, through having a stable, solid recognition of the conditional, volitional, impermanent, and ceasing nature of that state of mind, then one can attain full enlightenment. So this is a practice which, actually it's what I most commonly teach as a Vipassana method, is to enter deep Samadhi, preferably first jhana or higher, of course, but enter deep Samadhi and apply the recognition of impermanence. It's basically the method that's being given here. So it's recognizing that in that deep state of Samadhi, when the mind is very sharp and bright and clear, stable, unwavering, and undistracted, then the mind is well attuned to clearly seeing the conditional and impermanent nature of phenomena. And with that, then it's possible to recognize the conditional and impermanent nature of all phenomena, including everything that we identify as me and mine, including the conceit of self-existence. So all of that can be dropped away through developing the recognition of impermanence. Then the sutta continues, if he does not reach the elimination of the corruptions, then because of that passion for the Dhamma, because of that delight in the Dhamma, then with the complete elimination of the 5 lower fetters, he becomes a spontaneous reappearer, and there he will attain final nibbana without ever returning from that world. So then this is the case of someone who they reach first jhana, they develop this perception of impermanence, the recognition that the phenomenon that's currently going on, the experience of first jhana, they recognize that it is conditional, volitional, impermanent, and cessation of the cessation characteristic. But they don't completely eliminate their defilements. So this practice doesn't go to its full depth. There's still some residual attachment, particularly the attachment to self, attachment to the basic sense of self-existence. So there is here this deep passion for the Dhamma, so Dhamma raga, this delight in the Dhamma, so Dhamma nandi, so passion for the Dhamma and delight in the Dhamma, which this full commitment to and enjoyment of the Dhamma, which allows one to become a non-returner. So with that passion for the Dhamma, that delight in the Dhamma, then one can commit oneself to the perception of impermanence enough to drop away the coarser fetters. So the 5 lower fetters, the coarse fetters of belief in self-identity, skeptical doubt, misapprehension of habitual practices, sensual desire, and aversion. So the 5 coarse fetters, the 5 low fetters. And I find this really interesting because this is one of the rare cases in the suttas where the word raga is used in a positive sense. So normally the word raga is always used to mean lust or passion, this very strong desire and obsession of mind. So Dhamma raga then is that same powerful lust and passion and obsessive mind, but directed towards the Dhamma rather than towards anything unwholesome. So it's a lust for the Dhamma, passion for the Dhamma, an obsessiveness towards the Dhamma. And that's the kind of lust and passion and obsessiveness which is actually of benefit, which brings us closer to enlightenment. And in this case is singled out as a contributing factor to attaining stream entry. And so a spontaneous reappear, this is referring to somebody who is born as a deva, and in particular, it usually refers to someone who is born in the pure land, in the pure abodes, the Suddhavasa. So the pure land where non-returners who have not yet attained full enlightenment are born, and where they will live for usually many eons as they gradually wear away the residual attachment to self-existence, the residual belief in self-existence. So it says, there he will attain final nibbana without ever returning from that world. So a non-returner then is reborn in the Pure Land, where they will remain until they attain full enlightenment. And Ānanda says, householder, this is one thing by means of which a vigilant, ardent, dedicated monk might liberate an unliberated mind, eliminate all the corruptions that have not yet been eliminated, and reach the unsurpassable freedom from bondage that has not yet been reached. And then he says, here's another one, householder. A monk attains and remains in the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, so the 4 stages of deep samadhi, so first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth jhana, and applies the same recognition. The same recognition for each one of the jhanas, recognizing this is conditional and volitional, it's impermanent and has the nature of cessation. And through this one can attain full enlightenment, or at least become a non-returner. Again, applying the perception of impermanence, the recognition that the experience that's happening is conditional, dependent upon willpower, impermanent, and subject to cessation. So applying that in each of the 4 jhanas. So this is one sutta which indicates, by the way, that first jhana is sufficient to attain enlightenment. But of course, second, third, and fourth jhana are increasingly refined states of samadhi where the mind is more and more stable and imperturbable. So fourth jhana, of course, is considered the ideal state of mind for practicing vipassana. Fourth jhana is when the mind is established in very firm equanimity and very sharp mindfulness. So this makes it the ideal conditions for practicing vipassana, in this case, the perception of impermanence. But again, Venerable Ānanda starts by pointing out that even just in first jhana, if one applies the recognition of impermanence with enough sincerity, then it's possible to attain full enlightenment. Then Ānanda switches to talking about the Brahma-viharas. So he says, here's another one, householder. A monk dwells having suffused the first direction with a mind of loving kindness, as well as the second, third, and fourth directions. Above, below, around, and everywhere, impartially and all-encompassing, he dwells having suffused the entire world with a mind of loving kindness, abundant, enormous, immeasurable, free of aversion and hostility. He reflects, this is the mental liberation of loving kindness. It is conditional and volitional. Whatever is conditional and volitional is impermanent and will cease. So again, applying the same perception of insight, the same application of wisdom to the experience of the Brahma-viharas. So this is starting with loving kindness, and then the next three sections are compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. So metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. And in each case, applying the same investigation. So the practice here then is to pick one of the Brahma-viharas and to commit fully to it, to immerse one's mind thoroughly and completely in that Brahma-vihara until it is immeasurable, till it is limitless, so all-encompassing. So not leaving any being out, not placing any more or any less attention on any one particular being, optimally even dropping the whole concept of beings, the whole concept of separate beings, and just focusing entirely on the Brahma-vihara itself, with no inside, no outside, no me, no other, just boundless, limitless metta, karuna, mudita, or upekkha. So this is a state of mind then which is similar to jhana. So when one is fully immersed in metta, for example, then the mind is completely unified in metta. It's not doing anything else. So it has complete unification. The mind is not distracted. So it's focused. It's concentrated. It's not doing anything other than metta. So it's very concentrated, very focused. So this also is a form of samadhi. So it's the samadhi of metta samadhi, metta ceto vimutti. So the temporary mental liberation through focusing entirely on loving kindness. So this is then a very stable, bright, peaceful state of mind, which again, similar to jhana, provides excellent circumstances for the cultivation of insight. And some people actually say that the mental liberation through loving kindness is synonymous with jhana. That if one is really fully immersed in metta, then one is by default in first jhana or second jhana. That one is by default fully engaged with the Brahma-vihara using a jhana state of concentration, a jhana state of samadhi. Then Venerable Ānanda goes into speaking about the formless attainments, the incorporeal states of mind. So the states of mind beyond experience of physicality. So he says, here's another one, householder. By completely transcending all perceptions of form, so in here that's all perceptions of physical substance, so bodies, physical body, transcending all perception of physical bodies and objects. It says, with the disappearance of perceptions of resistance. So the perception of resistance, for example, when you press against the wall resists you. So this is an experience of the physical world. Experience of the physical world is that there is resistance. Physical objects which resist the movement of other physical objects. So in attempting to enter into the formless attainments, one has to drop all perceptions of physicality, of physical objects which resist the movement of each other. It has to be dropped. So that's what's meant by the disappearance of perceptions of resistance. And it says, by not paying attention to perceptions of diversity. So perceptions of diversity here means the perception that there's a lot of different separate objects. The formless attainments are also characterized by a uniform field of awareness, a field of awareness which is not divided up into separate things. It's a single unified experience. So the first one, it says, is perceiving infinite space. A monk attains and remains in the dimension of infinite space. So in this, there's only the awareness of infinite limitless space, nothing else. No objects within that infinite space, no things that resist or impede movement within infinite space. There's simply infinite limitless space. And so once again, one reflects, this is the dimension of infinite space. It is conditional and volitional. Whatever is conditional and volitional is impermanent and will cease, so as before. So also, if one enters into the perception of infinite space, then one can apply the same recognition. This experience is conditional and volitional. This experience is something which is unreliable and which depends upon specific circumstances and conditions in order for it to be experienced. And therefore, it's impermanent and subject to cessation, like everything else. And again, through this application of mind, one can recognize the impermanent and conditional nature of all things, and therefore experience disenchantment, dispassion, relinquish one's fascination and craving for any sankhara, and therefore attain full enlightenment. And then he applies the same to the next two. So the perception of infinite consciousness, it says, by completely transcending the dimension of infinite space, perceiving infinite consciousness, a monk attains and remains in the dimension of infinite consciousness. So when one is in the perception of infinite space, then one recognizes that this infinite space is being perceived by consciousness. So then, dropping the perception of space, one turns attention to perception of infinite consciousness. And then, while in that state, once again, one applies this recognition of the conditional, volitional, impermanent, and ceasing nature of that experience as well. Then the third formless attainment, by completely transcending the dimension of infinite consciousness, perceiving nothing existing, a monk attains and remains in the dimension of nothingness. So in this case, one is even dropping the perception of consciousness, but rather there's the experience of absolutely nothing existing, except for the mind which is aware of nothing. So there is still a functional mind which is aware. So even in the perception of nothingness, we still have mental awareness and the capacity to practice vipassana, the capacity to recognize the conditional and impermanent nature of the experience. What you'll notice, though, is that he does not mention the fourth formless attainment, which is called neither perception nor non-perception. And the reason for that, as is mentioned in other suttas, such as the Anupada Sutta, is that in the state of neither perception nor non-perception, the mind is too subtle to engage in any activity at all. So the mind is still engaging in a very slight self-sustaining activity, which is why it's called not in a state of non-perception. So the mind is still awake, but at the same time, there is no perception going on. So this is why it's called neither perception nor non-perception. So the mind is awake, but it's completely non-functional for a period of time. So in the state of neither perception or non-perception, it is not possible to practice the perception of impermanence, because that would be a perception, and there's neither perception nor non-perception. So one cannot practice vipassana, one cannot develop wisdom while in the state of neither perception nor non-perception, which is why it's not included in this sutta. So then Ānanda then wraps up. He says, householder, this is another thing by means of which a vigilant, ardent, dedicated monk might liberate an unliberated mind, eliminate all the corruptions that have not yet been eliminated, and reach the unsurpassable freedom from bondage that has not yet been reached. When this was said, Dasama said to Venerable Ānanda, Bhante Ānanda, it is just as if a person was seeking one treasure and gained 11 treasures. In the same way, Bhante, I was seeking one door to the deathless and gained 11 doors to the deathless that can be developed. Bhante, just as a person whose house has 11 doors can use any one of them to make himself safe if the house is on fire. In the same way, Bhante, I can use any of these 11 doors to the deathless to make myself safe. Bhante, members of other religions will seek out money to give to their teacher. Why don't I also make an offering to Venerable Ānanda? Then Dasama gathered together the community of monks who lived in Vesali and satisfied them by serving them many kinds of excellent food with his own hands. Then he presented each monk with a pair of robes, presented Venerable Ānanda with a set of 3 robes, and had 500 monastic dwellings constructed for Venerable Ānanda. So that's the end of the sutta. So here Dasama ends with this delighted exclamation that he was just asking for one way, one quick, easy way to attain enlightenment, and Venerable Ānanda told him 11 ways. In actuality, it's just 11 permutations on one way. So that one way is to develop strong samadhi and to practice the perception of impermanence. So to see one's experiences as conditional, volitional, impermanent, and of the nature of cessation, having the characteristic of cessation. So applying those 4 reflections, recognitions to our experiences. And so this, again, it's a way of coming to safety. So here we have the metaphor of a burning house. So it's like if you're in a house that's on fire and it has 11 doors, you can escape through any one of those 11 doors. So in the same way, we're in samsara, which is like being inside a burning house. And we have these 11 ways to escape, these 11 ways to get out. And it ends, of course, with Dasama making offerings to the Sangha, expressing his appreciation through supporting the monastic Sangha with food, robes, and dwelling places. So that's the end of this sutta. At this time, if you have any questions or comments, please go ahead and type them in the live chat, and I'll answer them as best I can. So let's see what we have here. So we have a number of comments. James is very excited. So James asks, can this practice be done when walking and lying down in addition to sitting and standing? So the practice that's described here is particularly about samadhi. So it relies upon first gaining jhana or full immersion in the Brahmaviharas. So those require a very stable platform for the mind, which is usually sitting meditation. So it's very difficult to enter jhana in any posture other than sitting. It's theoretically possible to enter jhana while lying down or standing up, but it's much more difficult, and I haven't actually heard of it. And jhana while walking is nearly impossible. Again, there's a very small number of teachers who assert that walking jhana is possible, but I've never heard of anybody experiencing it. So the instructions in the sutta, I would say, are particularly aimed at sitting meditation. as sitting meditation is the ideal position for cultivating jhana. And again, potentially reclining and standing. So there are cases in the suttas of monks entering jhana while reclining, though it takes a strong effort to keep the mind alert and awake. But there are some people who are able to get samadhi in the reclining position. Standing position can also be good for samadhi, but the body is usually rocking a little bit. The body is constantly adjusting its balance, which also tends to jostle the mind a little bit. So standing meditation is really not as good as sitting for samadhi purposes. So you can work on stabilizing one's samadhi and building up the Brahma-viharas while standing and walking. But then ultimately it is while sitting that one will enter into very deep, strong samadhi and be able to apply the practice that's described in the sutta. Then James says, how much verbalizing should be done when generating this reflection? Often I mentally repeat the reflection verbatim from the sutta and then rest in awareness of the changing mental release. Yeah, I mean, it's fine to use it verbally at the very beginning, just to point your mind in the right direction, just to get you started. But ultimately, we're trying to develop a direct, nonverbal awareness. So getting out of the thinking mind and coming into the feeling mind, the direct awareness mind. So just make sure that that's what you're doing, that you're coming into direct awareness mind. Similarly to metta. So for example, when starting metta practice, you might start with using some words like repeating, may everyone be happy, may everyone be happy, to help point your mind in the right direction. But once your mind is pointed towards the feeling of metta, then you just drop the words and just do metta directly. So it's the same. In the beginning, you might tell yourself something like conditional, volitional, impermanent, cessation. But then once you start to move into that recognition, that awareness, then you drop the words and just deepen the awareness itself. Because the words will prevent you from getting into a deep awareness. The words can help you get into a shallow experience, but then they will prevent that experience from deepening. So you need to drop the words. Next question, Michael asks, can one say that while one cannot practice impermanence in the state of neither perception or no perception, one has direct experience of it in that state? Then upon leaving that meditation, one can reflect upon it. So you can reflect on neither perception nor non-perception after leaving it. Same with the cessation of perception and feeling. Though again, at that, if one is experiencing cessation of perception and feeling, one is already a non-returner, in which case you don't need to worry about these things so much. But yeah, the experience of neither perception nor non-perception, does one have the direct experience of impermanence? Well, I mean, technically we have direct experience of impermanence all the time. We just don't recognize it. Impermanence is the nature of reality. We just don't recognize it because we're caught in the delusion of permanence. So upon emerging from the experience of neither perception nor non-perception, you would still have to make an effort to recognize that that state was impermanent. Because one of the problems, and we see this in when the Buddha was dealing with one of his former teachers, one of the problems is that people would enter into deep states of samadhi up to neither perception nor non-perception. Then after emerging, they would think, oh, I touched absolute reality. They would think, oh, I for a brief period of time, experienced the true nature of things, the true nature of the universe, the true nature of mind. So that's applying the perception of permanence to the state of mind in deep samadhi. So that's a function of delusion. So one is not necessarily automatically perceiving impermanence in the state of neither perception or non-perception. One still has to make an effort to direct the mind in that way after the state is over. And Gabriella asks, she says, I often hear that the Brahma-viharas can only lead to one's return, but this sutta says it leads to full awakening. Where does the first perception come from? So my understanding is that that belief comes from the idea that, especially with the first three Brahma-viharas, since they're pleasant states of mind, the idea is that they're therefore accompanied by desire, which means that they cannot be attainable by a non-returner. However, this doesn't appear anywhere in the suttas. This idea doesn't appear anywhere in the suttas, and it actually seems quite doubtful to me. Because the state of mind of an enlightened being is metta, karuna, mudita, upekkha. The state of mind of an enlightened being is Brahma-viharas all the time. So clearly, desire is not a necessary component for one to experience metta, karuna, and mudita. So I'm not sure where that comes from. It probably comes from the commentaries or the Visuddhimagga, but I can't think of anywhere in the suttas where it says this. And I should point out here, though, that the sutta is not actually saying that the Brahma-viharas themselves lead to enlightenment. Rather, it's saying that applying the perception of impermanence, the perception of conditionality, volitionality, impermanence, and cessation, applying this perception to the Brahma-viharas can lead to recognizing the impermanence of all phenomena, the conditionality of all phenomena, and therefore lead to full enlightenment. That's my understanding here. So again, it's not the Brahma-vihara that leads to enlightenment, it's the perception of impermanence that leads to enlightenment. Then Michael says, I have heard that the Brahma-viharas can only lead to rebirth in the Brahma realms, but your explanation is different, makes more sense. So the Brahma-viharas, if practiced only for their own sake, will lead to rebirth in the Brahma realms. That's clearly stated in the suttas in a few places. So if you're just immersing the mind in the Brahma-viharas and just reveling in the sheer delight of being in Brahma-viharas, then yeah, that will only lead to rebirth in the Brahma worlds. That's true. So once again, here we are applying the perception of impermanence. We're applying the mind of insight to the experience. So not just indulging in the Brahma-vihara itself, but rather recognizing that even the Brahma-viharas are impermanent, conditional, volitional, and have the characteristic of cessation. Then Gabriella says, when we select a meditation subject for awakening, is it necessary to use only one meditation subject and keep it for years, or just for one session? So my perspective is it's one session. This is the way I was trained, and this is what's always worked incredibly well for me, is I have several different meditation objects, and depending upon the circumstances I'm faced with, I might use a different object. So I do have my standard method, which I use most of the time, which is, in terms of samadhi, it's mindfulness of the body, focused on the feeling of my hands in my lap. That's my standard go-to samadhi method. But there's other methods that I use at other times, depending upon the needs of the mind. And this seems most appropriate to me. It's kind of like a diet. And by diet here, I mean what you eat day by day, not necessarily a special diet that you take on. If you only eat the same thing all the time, well, you can get away with that for a little while, but it's actually kind of unhealthy. So if you eat nothing but white rice for the rest of your life, you will actually get very sick. Within a few weeks, you will start to get very sick. Because that's not, it's not addressing all the needs of your body. It's only addressing some of the needs of your body. So it's necessary to also incorporate a variety of other foods into your diet so that you can have a complete nutrition, something that addresses all the needs of your body. And you might wake up one day and think, well, today I really need to eat kale, or today I really need to eat apples or whatever, because that's what your body's needing. Well, it's the same. You have a variety of different methods that you can use to nourish your practice. And there might be one core method that you use most of the time, but you have others for when your practice is like, no, I really need to do such and such today. That's really what's necessary to nourish my practice. Then Mark says, one of my teachers attained jhana lying down while on a 30-day retreat in Nepal. After this, he got very excited and went to his teacher, who laughed and said he told him how to do this 10 years ago. Yeah. Yeah, so as I mentioned, it is possible to attain jhana while lying down. It's just more difficult because the mind tends to fall into dullness. But if you can keep your mind very alert, then yeah, you can enter jhana while lying down. As for the teacher telling him 10 years ago, yeah, teachers tell us lots of things which we hear and we think we understand, but then we don't apply for long periods of time. This is normal. It's usually how things go. We get given instructions and we don't quite follow them, or we don't quite get them. And then years and years and years later, it clicks and we're like, oh, okay, this is what I was supposed to be doing all along. Yeah, that's just the way it goes. And that's the end of the questions. So I think if there's nothing else, we can go ahead and end it there. So thank you all for joining in, for listening to the words of the Buddha and contemplating them and discussing them. And we'll see you again at 7:30 this evening. So we'll end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.